we should probably say too that, when we're talking about the Kochs and their ideology, we should also mention what is commonly called the Kochtopus, really is a massive, massive organization. So the two brothers, it's really the two brothers that we're focusing on, but they're getting most of their profits, right, from its oil, gas, refining, fracking, mass fertilizers, forest products, mass commodity speculation, oil derivatives, just shitbag, top tier capitalist scum shit, right?
Yeah, it's everything like an evil company does, they do.
Yeah, absolutely. But what happens next is where it gets really complicated, because from there, they funnel basically all of their profits into all these different arms through which they carry out their political and what we're going to talk about, basically their ideological project. So they've got, there's different sort of foundations at the head of it. You talk about the Charles Koch Foundation, the Koch Family Philanthropy Foundation, Americans for Prosperity, maybe you've heard of, Freedom Partners, all these bullshit names, right? And those quote unquote philanthropic organizations then funnel those profits down through other arms. So you've got the think tank arms, which are the people in charge of writing every single public policy recommendation in Washington, D.C. You've got Cato, perhaps you've heard of them, Heritage Foundation, Institute for Humane Studies, CIE, Manhattan Institute, Mercatus Center, more on them in a second, the NCPA, AIE. These are all Koch industry, right?
Yeah.
Not only do you have then the think tanks, but you've got on the other, imagine an octopus, right? Now we got another tentacle. Now you've got what you could call the AstroTurf organizations, which really start pumping up, as we've covered on this podcast with the Tea Party. And actually, friends of the pod, Mark Ames and Yasha Levine, did a lot of great work reporting the Koch's influence on Tea Party AstroTurf protests in the mid-aughts during the Obama administration, and they got a lot of shit for it at the time. And then there was a bunch of mea culpas from some journalists. Funny enough, a lot of those journalists who might be also listening to this podcast right now also took Koch money at one point, but that's okay. So you got the AstroTurf orgs, things like the NRA, Americans for Prosperity, the National Right to Life, the fucking Federalist Society. We've talked about them a lot. Freedom Works. Yeah. All these kind of organizations have these generic names. Generation Opportunity, American Commitment, National Review Institute. They just,
Identity Europa.
Yeah. So then you got another tentacle, right? Then you got the lobbyist arms. And these especially are accountants, tax attorneys, and lawyers, everyone's favorite. And this is where you get an organization called ALEC, which I think we'll get into maybe a little, if we've got time, a little more in depth, as well as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is a big power player here. Mm-hmm. Then you've got the congressional collaborators and all of the money they funnel into congressional campaigns, not just in Congress, but we should talk about state legislatures, mayors, governors, and even fucking dog catchers, right?
I mean, famously, just to give an example, in this town, I believe it's called Wakeford School District. This is a school district, and I think it was North Carolina. I watched a documentary on it kind of long time ago, so forgive me if I'm a little hazy. The Kochs got involved in the school board race there because their whole thing was that busing, or what you might call integration of schools, especially in this case, was actually a infringement on the rights. I mean, in fact, to the Kochs, public schools to begin with are sort of an ideological abomination. But this documentary, I believe Koch brothers exposed, did a really wonderful job of showing they actually just cribbed the same exact language from George Wallace around school choice, around busing, around this forced, as they call it, forced integration, and recycled it, decades and decades later. And in fact, this has become sort of like a big movement. And we see this in the charter school thing too, is this sort of desegregation, or rather resegregation of schools. And for the Kochs, who, you think these guys love freedom, have been absolutely helping lead the charge on that. And they funded these school board candidates to the tunes of like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, we should get into this. Maybe this is like this episode's gonna have to go long, but we should get into the school choice thing, because that's a really important part of their ideological project. But so yeah, you've got these congressional and legal and political collaborators. You've got big names, of course, everyone knows: Mitch McConnell, Ted Cruz, etc. But like
Scott Walker.
Yeah, Scott Walker, Paul Ryan, don't forget. And, if you thought them funding the Tea Party under Obama was bad, just wait until you see what happens when Q people start getting Koch money, in case that's not already happening.
I would say that Q people don't need to, because I think you can really draw a straight line from a lot of the sort of nuttier Tea Party stuff, of which there was a lot, straight to the Q people. I mean, a lot of the sort of more like conspiratorial thinking Tea Partiers, definitely, I mean, same exact demographic, but I mean, probably a lot of the same people that were involved in that movement back then.
Absolutely. But you'll see them popping up more and more in actual, like, in government positions when they're backed by the Koch brothers. Well, Koch brother, I guess. It's so weird that he's dead. But he's alive in spirit and in funding. And then, another arm, of course, is the law and the amount of money, not just in lobbyists that's poured in, but also in actually, courting justices, nominating justices, Federalist Society, and working on that entire project. And then the final kind of pillar, or there's, I guess, two more pillars, really, two more arms. You've got the media and their shills. You've got massive publications and journalists that they work with, and so many things. And you've got academia, and the money in academia is remarkable. It really cannot be overstated, like how much Koch money has poured into primarily economics departments, but it's has rapidly expanded across other social sciences departments. The most obvious glaring case is with George Mason University. Now, George Mason University is, of course, known as a kind of libertarian university, but it should be, like, to be clear, George Mason University is a public university. It is public Virginia University. Like, it is not a private university, right? But at George Mason alone, over $150 million that we know of was donated between 2005 and 2015. And just in 2018, there's a huge scandal because basically after Antonin Scalia's death, of course, who was, again, a great friend to the Kochs.
A friend of the pod as well. Also tried to suck his own dick and died.
I kind of actually do think that there was something funny with the mistress. And that's why he died. Yeah, I have a whole theory about it.
Because he was smothered, right?
Yeah, there was no autopsy, which I find very interesting. Anyway, that's a different podcast. Yeah, I have theories about that. But anyway, so George Mason University, they got in some hot water by the students and a bunch of student activist groups because in 2018, they accepted a Koch donation of 10 million plus an anonymous donation of 20 million in order to rename the law school the Antonin Scalia School of Law. I want to just note too that abbreviation is ASSOL.
Oh, that's incredible.
Which I feel like someone should have seen that coming. It's literally the law school is named asshole.
Let me ask you this, and I'm not trying to get into any, ethnicity talk here. What kind of name is Antonin?
Italian. No?
Anthony's Italian. Tony.
I don't know if he went by Tony. Anyway,
it's like Shakespeare trying to do Italy. It's a bunch of bullshit. Someone's really got to look into that guy.
Anyway, so allegedly all this money was earmarked, quote, formally for, quote, scholarships, right? But there were like massive student protests about taking this money, like quite large. And the George Mason University provost S. David Wu claimed that the entire $30 million was for scholarships, nothing else, no strings attached. And yet student activists filed a FOIA suit, which very cutely is called a VFOIA suit in Virginia, because it's the state of Virginia. No jokes, Brace. And
okay, look, can I just make one real quick?
No.
The real VFOIA I got to file is I think that like probably 70% of girls don't know where the P comes from.
Okay.
Because I've asked and a lot just like kind of stumble. I'm like, they're like, oh, you don't know? I'm like, no, you don't either.
All right. Anyway,
Sorry,
so as a result of this VFOIA suit, they obtained emails detailing that actually there were very rigorous negotiations between the school and the Koch brothers.
Classic.
And including a very overwhelming role by the Federalist Society itself, including stipulations of how designated representatives would have input into hiring decisions at the university. So basically saying, we're giving you this money, but we're going to tell you who's being hired at your university. And they agreed to it. Right.
Well, that's the thing with, I think, a lot of economics departments sort of across the country. And what the Kochs do and what other groups like the Koch brothers do, but really the Koch brothers are really good at this, is they start like centers at schools. Like there's the Hoover Institute at Stanford.
Right.
And they have all this shit, George Mason.
George Mason.
Exactly. And they start running departments. Like they will actually fund professors because these guys, like, they're not just funding top level shit. They're funding like mid level and lower level shit too. And so what you have is people talk a lot again, like about the long march to the institutions. Well, like they buy the institution and they put all their guys in there. And what they have is a incredibly fringe economic ideology that is becoming more and more mainstream, which I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, go on.
Well, no, I mean, it's and this isn't going away. Like, I think it was just yesterday, Naked Capitalism reported on Tufts University accepting another public policy, like you say, public policy center being established at Tufts University by the Koch brothers. And the thing is that all these universities are so hard up now because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got even more declining, profits, however we want to call it. They're even more privatized and held to investors. They're even more tied up in, God knows what in the stock market and all this stuff. And so there's only going to be more and more opportunity for these vultures to come in. And like you said, there's a real ideological project at work here. It's not just, where we can put our money and, we're going to funnel it to the academies. Like, no. There's a reason why what you learn in the academies is what you learn in the academies, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, economics degrees, or studying economics rather, is an ideological project. It's not like a scientific project in a lot of these places.
At these places, yeah. As a Marxist, I would disagree with that, but
that's what I'm saying. Like economics departments are filled with that kind of shit.
Well, there was that book, Democracy in Chains by Nancy McLean from Duke that came out a couple years ago. Maybe it was longer than a couple years ago. I can't remember. But that really detailed a lot of the kind of ideological thrust of the academic takeover, or not just the takeover of what they're teaching, but actually the drive to privatize schools. And, she really details the very close relationship between Buchanan, who wasn't really talked about very much, but who is very much an American titan in the kind of neoliberal. Are you
talking about Pat?
No, James Buchanan.
Oh, okay.
The neoliberal or libertarian, radical liberal. A lot of these things get fuzzy for me depending on what we're talking about. Revolution that takes place in America. We talk a lot about UChicago and the Hardy boys over at UChicago who, as we've talked about, went all throughout South America, ravaging it. But, Buchanan at Virginia, at George Mason, was another big center of this. And this is what McLean finds out is when she's going through all this correspondence that that Buchanan and Charles Koch had a real close working relationship. And Buchanan is, when we talk about fringe, he's a fringe. He sees the world even more dystopian than Adam Smith. I think at one point he said each person seeks mastery over a world of slaves. That is the human drive.
Wait, is that true?
That's what Buchanan thinks, that the world is just makers and takers.
God damn. I am definitely a taker then. Wow.
Yeah, but so his big gift to the political discourse is basically what we call choice theory, public choice theory, which has come to be known as very benign thanks to a lot of the ideological work by the foundations like that the Koch brothers run, right? And this whole idea of choice isn't bad. Everyone wants choice, right? Public choice. You're going to hear it with the post office just as much. Wouldn't you like the choice with the post office and FedEx? Wouldn't you like the choice? Well, this comes out of the drive to privatize education. Yeah, so you hear this stuff, disseminated through the discourse all the time, but the drive to privatize education is actually a much deeper attack, and actually is fueled by a much deeper drive that Buchanan and Charles Koch had, which is that it really was attacking a feature of democracy that enables an educated citizenry, right? So there's sort of two prongs here, is that at the higher level, right, when we're talking about introducing private education into colleges and universities, public education, free college education allows students to focus on, not just on their education, but other things like public involvement, development of ideas, public consciousness, political activity. These are all things that free college basically enabled students to participate in.
Well, one thing I would say too is that when you have to take out a bunch of debt for college, or really for anything, that creates like this link between you and it inspires like a sort of like mental bond between you and the people you're indebted to.
Absolutely.
And so you'll find people a lot less willing to take economic, political, social risks if they actually, if they have a huge credit card debt or anything like that. People think it's the obvious, but like just from my experience, for instance, with the factory, people have this. They're trained to feel indebted to somebody they owe debt to, and like it creates this like bond between them and the economic system.
Absolutely. To be clear, Buchanan and Koch are explicit about that being the project, because at this time, Buchanan moves to George Mason in 1965. At this time, there are massive demonstrations going on all throughout the country on college campuses, right? There's massive social upheaval with the civil rights movement. There was just, one of Buchanan's explicit projects is overturning and challenging Brown versus Board of Education. Why? Because that lays the groundwork to resegregate schools and that's where the intellectual fundament of school choice theory lies. Right? I
mean, there's a reason these people are so fucking obsessed with schools, because like you're saying that, the 1970s, especially the 1960s, I mean, campuses were in an uproar everywhere. Those students were incorrect that students are the revolutionary subject because of their class position, or rather because they are not part of the proletariat. Fucking impossible. You just end up getting. Anyways, I can get into that another time. I will say, if the Progressive Labor Party had succeeded in taking over the SDS at the '69 convention, we would be speaking Vietnamese right now, which I think would be a good thing. Anyways, but a lot of this was really in the air with these libertarians back then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you brought up being indebted creates a kind of mental bond. Privatizing the universities and introducing that in was not just a way of getting them bound to some financial entity. And, like we said at the beginning of the show, it's not just greedy people being like, oh, we can make money off of student loans or private universities charging crazy tuitions. That's that is part of it, of course. It always is, right? But tied up in that project is also then you create an environment or change an environment that is no longer safe for any kind of explicit political activity against their larger capitalist project, because now you are indebted to your future career aspirations, which are tied to you getting a paycheck, which you need in order to pay off your school debt. Or now you are tied to the safety of your family, which is sacrificed to put you through into college and is paying all of your bills while you're there, right? So creating these lines of indebtedness is an explicit, and look, there's the correspondence that proves this. I mean, when I say it's explicit, I mean it's explicit, right? And on the lower I do want to mention that when we talk about the charter school and the public choice theory project in terms of lower education, that Buchanan, is explicit as well, that this is a project towards disenfranchisement, because as you privatize and basically undo desegregation of public schools, what you do is it's not just that you're continuing to then produce new forms of mass inequality, but also creating a mechanism that will institutionally reproduce mass inequality on a scale that, just fucking look at it. We've seen it. It's done.
Yeah.
They've done it.
I will say, like, all this stuff we're talking about, they won. Like, we're going to get more into this, and I think we're going to do 2 episodes on this. I think we're going to get more into this then. But, like, these ideas are not fringe. They are not ideas that a few cranks who read too much Ayn Rand have. In some
this isn't like blue-faced silver guy that we all dunk on. Like,
no.
This is the ruling ideology.
So, like, I think a good sort of comparison is this. It's like, you think of, like, maybe some of our listeners won't see this, but every year, or I guess every 4 years, there's a convention for the Libertarian Party. Yeah, every 4 years. And it is filled with freaks, whack jobs, nut jobs, loon jobs.
And strangely enough, none of them have jobs.
Very true. There's that fucking freak who wears the shoe on his head. I can't remember his fucking name.
Shoe guy.
Yeah, that freak. There's like freaks who got their dicks out. There's guys with their shirts off. And you're like, look at these wackadoodles. They'll never accomplish anything. Well, that's a fucking sideshow, baby. Like, that is like, if we're talking about political movement comparisons, like the DSA or whatever, any socialist movement is actually more comparable to that than it is to the real libertarian movement, which actually has, this octopus, by the way, we can say octopus. First of all, I'm Jewish. Second of all, they're not, which feel like that's very strange for rich people not to be, but, we can talk about this after. It's like they're winning. They're everywhere. Their ideas are more accepted, I think, than most people can even fathom. So I do want to kind of end on this. It has been just over, I think just by about 4 days, 49 years since the Powell memo was put forth into this world. And this thing has really been like, there was I believe there was the Dimitrov letter that the British forged after World War I to sort of show that communists were fomenting revolution in Britain. It was obvious, it was fake. But it was like a forged letter by British intelligence to show that Georgy Dimitrov, the head of the Communist International, was instructing British workers to sabotage the British economy. God willing, he had been doing that. He was not. But this is like if the Dimitrov letter was real, and then they actually did it too. So who is this fucking guy?
Well, so we should say, I think it's even more apt to call it a manifesto, because that's how politically powerful this is. So this is, Louis Franklin Powell Jr. He wrote this on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. I think it was like 2 years later, he was nominated for the Supreme Court by Richard Nixon. So this is, he's a big time lawyer. This is, he's a big deal guy in American politics. 2 months before he was nominated to the Supreme Court by Nixon. So even more big deal. But he wrote this in 1971. Basically, the Chamber of Commerce was looking around, like we've mentioned, 60s through the late 60s, early 70s, just complete chaos in the streets in America that in a way that I don't think millennials truly understand.
Way more insane than it is right now.
Like
not even comparable, really.
Not comparable at all whatsoever in any way.
Plus, everyone looked cool.
Yeah, plus it had been, not comparable at all. But anyway, so, the kind of like business objectives or business, businessmen, capitalists, ideology was losing steam, and they felt like they weren't, it was 1971 and they were looking down at a future, and the Chamber of Commerce and these capitalists and saying, what the hell do we do? We're unpopular. How do we fix this? And what you basically have is what you can call a revolutionary manifesto, or as it may be, a counter-revolutionary manifesto. You can make the argument. So I'm just going to read from a couple points that I think, are important to kind of hammer in. The most disquieting voices joining the chorus of criticism come from perfectly respectable elements of society, from the college campus, the pulpit, the media, the intellectual and literary journals, the arts and sciences, and from politicians. In most of these groups, the movement against the system, and they would be talking of themselves as the system, again, as capitalists, is participated in only by minorities. Yet these often are the most articulate, the most vocal, the most prolific in their writing and speaking. The campuses from which much of the criticism emanates are supported by 1, tax funds generated largely from American business, and 2, contributions from capital funds controlled or generated by American business. Most of the media, including the national TV systems, are owned and theoretically controlled by corporations which depend on profits and the enterprise system to survive. What specifically should be done? The first essential, a prerequisite to any effective action, is for businessmen to confront this problem as a primary responsibility of corporate management. The day is long past when the chief executive officer of a major corporation discharges his responsibility by maintaining a satisfactory growth of profits, with due regard to corporations' public and social responsibilities. If our system is to survive, top management must be equally concerned with protecting and preserving the system itself. This involves far more than an increased emphasis on, quote, public relations or, quote, governmental affairs. Strength lies in organization, in careful, long-range planning and implementation, in consistency of action over an indefinite period of years, in the scale of financing available only through joint effort, and in the political power available only through united action and national organizations.
Wow. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really long manifesto, right? He basically says, he lays out all, we'll link to it. He lays out all these different arenas of which businesses need to reassert themselves. He lays out the media. He lays out academia. He lays out public policy. He lays out the legal realm. He talks about how they need to reinvigorate shareholders as rights-holding citizens, basically, of corporations. We'll get into how that has that is just how people think now, right? And this manifesto really is credited with inspiring the founding of the Heritage, of Cato, of the Manhattan Institute. And you've got people like the Koch brothers, but others as well, reading this and saying, you're right, we need to unite. We need to create a vast network. We're looking at a decades-long project of waging a war on the American people to get what we want and done to complete our revolution? What do we need to do? And they fucking did it.